to turn the mic on. Can you hear me? Right, there's so much to say. I know where to start, really. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along this evening, but also the people who've organised it, as always. Alan Shipman, the chairman of East Midlands, and all the other people that have been involved in organising it, and Alan Graves for chairing it this evening. And of course, let's just say something about the speakers. Margot Parker, she's in actually an awful lot of pain, that's just why she can't stand up, but she's a stalwart of UKIP. She's one of my remaining faithful MEPs in the Parliament, and she's here tonight rather than picking up another 320 euros tax-free in Brussels, as some of our erstwhile colleagues are. So thank you, Margot, for coming along. And of course, not to forget her right-hand man, Fred. And I hear lots about Fred in Brussels and Strasbourg. Don't worry, Margot, I won't tell him what you said. But Fred supports her absolutely in what she does, and I'm very grateful to them and to the other MEPs that have stuck by UKIP. And of course, we've had some great speakers tonight with Alan Craig, who's described the world of insanity that we now live in modern Britain. Is it not working? Right, okay, I'll try not to sneeze as well. You know, Alan has described this. I mean, you live in a mad world now. You've got to laugh, haven't you, really, at the things that go on. And of course, Carl Benjamin. I was interested in what you were saying there, Carl, about this idea that you can't define groups by the most extreme elements of the group. This philosophical idea? Well, yes, you see, because the Nazis got a very bad press because of the SS, I have to say.
I really don't think we should be comparing the Muslims to Nazis.
No, I wasn't. I was just making the logical conclusion of that, which is...
In terms of religious groups, I think that's a bad idea.
Well, I'm sure you all want to know what's happening on Brexit, don't you? Yes. So do I. Can anybody tell me? Everywhere I go, I went to the dentist this morning, he said, do you want to talk about Brexit? I said, no, just do the teeth. Everybody says the same thing. Well, where shall I start on Brexit? Well, it's got to be an unparalleled national humiliation in our country's history. And not only that, it's an international humiliation. Now, I made the comparison, which I don't think is quite fair, with Neville Chamberlain, who went off, I believe, 3 times to try and get a peace agreement with Herr Hitler in 1938, 1939. But he was doing it with good intent because Britain wasn't prepared for war. He really wanted to try and achieve a peace settlement, and he wanted to try and buy us some time. And he probably knew in his own heart that wasn't going to work, but he knew we weren't ready to fight a war. And he did it 3 times and came back and waved his worthless bit of paper, and we all know what happened after that. We have a Prime Minister now that doesn't want to actually do what the people want, which is to free us from the European Union. And she has made not 3 trips to Brussels, but in Strasbourg, but countless trips now. We've all lost count of the number of times. She's back there today, and they say that she'll be back there next week. We all know why we had a referendum back in 2016. Political reason and a philosophical reason, if that's the right word. The political reason was because UKIP forced that referendum through its electoral threat. It had spent the previous 23 years campaigning to get out of the European Union, and the referendum was Plan B, by the way. Plan A was to get a patriotic government to actually take us out, which has always been my preferred option. But Plan B was, if we couldn't get that, would force the government to have a referendum. And of course, the electoral threat that we posed eventually, through countless elections, local elections, by-elections, general elections, David Cameron was forced to promise the referendum, and he gave the referendum. And that was the political reason for it happening, but the other reason was because there was an unresolved question. And it wasn't just about UKIP, it was Parliament itself. Right from the start, we were taken in on the basis of lies. It was taken in on, I think, I can't remember quite the last vote on the European Communities Act, but it may have been as low as 3 votes. So there's always been a conflict, even in Parliament. And you know the Labour Party was against membership of the European Union right up until about 1987, even a bit later until when Michael Foot went. So there was an unresolved question about, is it a good idea, is it a bad idea, should we be in or should we be out? And it's torn the Tory party apart. It's also got many adherents in the Labour Party who want to leave. I've sat on a platform with a Labour MP who said exactly the same things that UKIP says about why we shouldn't be in the European Union. I was watching the TV yesterday. There was a young chap who's obviously solid Marxist from Momentum in the Labour Party saying exactly the same arguments why we should get out, because it's not democratic. I'm not sure that the Marxists really care about that, but anyway, it's not democratic. We can't implement the laws that we want to implement while we're members. And so not just the political reason why it happened, but if it's the right term, the philosophical reason, was because they had to resolve this problem. Now, Parliament, when it was first formed after the Magna Carta, it was called the General Council of the Realm. The king called representatives of the country, and it wasn't meant to be democratic, but it was meant to be representative of the different parts of the country. First Parliament's about 1220s, proper Parliament 1265. General Council of the Realm. They only represent the people. Whether they're elected or not, in those days they weren't, but they did. When Parliament can't agree, as it couldn't over a period of 40-odd years, they put it to the proper General Council of the Realm, which was the people, and said, what do you want to do? And the people said, we want to leave, by a very large majority. And that majority was achieved in the face of a relentless propaganda campaign by all the political parties, by the mass media, by the international establishment, you know, the World Bank, WTO, all of them had their say. Even President Obama came across to threaten us in our own country and tell us what we should do. We had that disgusting murder of Joe Cox a week before the referendum, and the media used that to try and infer that people who wanted to leave were somehow on a par with this crazed killer. Nevertheless, we won. So what do you think should have happened afterwards? We should have left. What's happened since? We have had 2 years and 9 months of the same politicians who said they would honour the result of the referendum, doing everything they possibly can to make it not happen. We had to wait for another 10 months from June 2016 until March, 9 or 10 months before Article 50 was even triggered. Then we had to wait till the summer before David Davis went off to talk to the European Union. He didn't last long. He resigned because things were going on behind his back, and he had enough integrity to resign. We had Dominic Raab step in as the next Brexit minister, and even he was forced to resign because things were going on behind his back. And now we've got the cabinet in uproar because they feel that things are going on behind their back. And what have we actually ended up with after this long process? Well, if you go back to the summer, last summer, you had the Chequers Agreement, where Mrs May came back and tried to foist this on her cabinet. I think that was what prompted David Davis to actually resign. And now we understand that that was actually written by the Germans, that Mrs May consulted Mrs Merkel and they came up with a plan, which Mrs May then tried to get past her own cabinet, and that was rejected. Well, eventually, of course, we've ended up with the withdrawal agreement. Parliament has already rejected that twice, and now the Speaker, who is also an avid Remainer, has invoked this obscure 400-year-old rule that says they can't vote on it a third time. Parliament is only supposed to vote on one thing, or if they vote on something and reject it, it can't be raised for another 12 months. Notwithstanding the fact that this is the most important political issue facing the British public, he's refused to let that go. So Mrs May is in another crisis whereby she has to go away, talk to the European Union and try to change the withdrawal agreement in some way in order to allow it to be voted on in Parliament. But why has Parliament rejected the withdrawal agreement? It's not because it's bad, it's because it isn't bad enough. And it is pretty bad, believe me. But it isn't bad enough for Parliament because they don't want to leave. So it's been kicked back yet again. Poor old Mrs May has to run back to Brussels to try and get them to give a further concession. Now, I haven't been able to catch up with the news tonight. I was watching it in my room before I came down. But as I understand it, her request for an extension to Article 50 till the 30th of June has been rejected. She's now got a deferral of Article 50 until the 22nd of May, the day before the European elections. And if Parliament rejects her deal yet again, then there will be a longer extension to Article 50, but that will mean that we have to take part in the European elections on the 23rd of May. And that seems to be where we are now. Now, the reason that Mrs May wanted to extend, in my opinion, Article 50 until the 30th of June was that would mean that Britain couldn't take part in the European elections because it'd be too late. You know, oh, well, we're leaving on 30th of June, so therefore what's the point in having European elections? The people wouldn't get a chance to register their vote again to leave the European Union, which will be given to them by UKIP, of course. The Tory party would, of course, probably get annihilated in that election. So that hasn't worked, but she's got it up until the 22nd of May. And what the European Union has said to her as well, if you can't get this thing through next week, then it'll have to be extended even longer, and then you will have to take part in the European elections. That's my understanding at the moment. And of course, is Parliament going to vote for it? Well, why would they vote for it? Because they don't want to leave anyway. They want to stay in. What could happen is that it's such a mess that nothing happens between now and the 29th of March, that Parliament doesn't vote on the withdrawal agreement, that the European Council is so fed up with the UK that at least one of the members decides it's not going to allow us to extend Article 50, and then we would just leave on the 29th of March, because the withdrawal agreement says the 29th of March. Bear in mind that can be changed within the legislation. There is that proviso in the legislation that allows that to happen. But the Article 50 itself says that if there is no withdrawal agreement reached 2 years to the day after you have triggered Article 50, then the treaties cease to apply and we leave. That may happen, but I wouldn't put any money on it. I don't think that is what's going to happen. But who knows, maybe God is smiling on us and that is what will happen. Now, the withdrawal, I'll just say a quick bit about the Withdrawal Act itself and the withdrawal agreement, because it's so appalling anyway. I mean, what does it cover? We've still got to pay them lots of money, £39 billion a year, plus more money, I'm sure, hidden behind that. We're still going to have to obey lots of their laws. We're still going to have the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice of the European Union. They will be able to impose taxes on us through changes to VAT if they so wish. We won't be able to negotiate any independent trade deals. And this whole thing will be litigated through this transition agreement, and the agreement itself will be decided by an arbitration panel of 5 people. So the chances are that we're going to win any arguments in a panel of 5 people, most of whom will probably Remainers anyway, is extremely unlikely. And what people forget is that the withdrawal agreement is mostly about dealing with our withdrawal. What has to come after that is the relationship agreement. And that is largely covered in something called the political declaration, which is a long list of things that the EU expects and wants us to do in our relationship with them after we've left. And if you look at that, then you might as well have not left anyway, because you are committed to so many things that the European Union wants. So all in all, the whole thing is a disaster. Now, if you really wanted to leave the European Union, what would you have done? Well, they say that the leavers, didn't have a plan. Well, yes, they did, because I wrote one. Now, I don't claim to be a great political genius, but I do have a certain knack of seeing where things are going to go under certain circumstances. And I thought to myself, back in 2014, when David Cameron was proposing a referendum, what would happen if there was a referendum and the Leave side won? Knowing the Tory government, which I absolutely distrust to the core, knowing the European Union, where I've worked for the last nearly 15 years, what would happen? If there was a referendum and Leave won, they would do everything they possibly could to delay the whole process, to impede the whole process, and then finally to overturn the verdict of the referendum. And where are we now, ladies and gentlemen? I think we're at the overturning phase, aren't we? We're pretty much moved into that. We're pretty much there. You've seen all the other things that have happened. And one of the things I predicted in that little book was that when we got to this stage, they would kick the can down the road far enough until the next general election, when you would have, I predict, I hope I'm wrong, if we don't leave, if Article 50 is extended long enough, you'll have a general election and you will have a Conservative Party led by somebody else. You will have the Labour Party saying, well, you know, it was all a big mistake, we shouldn't have left, so we're going to stay in. Or if we've left in name only, that we rejoin. Has this been a total conspiracy or complete and utter incompetence? I don't know, and I don't think we'll really find out till the 28th of March. I think this whole thing will drag on until the day before we're supposed to leave. So, what would you have done if you really wanted to leave the European Union? Well, in my little book I described it, I then expanded that into a plan. And don't forget, I haven't got thousands of civil servants behind me. I had a few people able to give me some research, give me a bit of input. But again, you don't need to be a political genius. You're dealing with people who don't want you to do something. So what do you do in that circumstance? You steal a march on them and you do it first before they can stop you. You would repeal the 1972 European Communities Act as a first step and not a final step. That should have been done the week after the referendum. It's never too late to do it, but you would repeal it. I'd tear up the withdrawal agreement if I was Prime Minister, if we're going to play fantasy Prime Ministers. Tear it up. Parliament should repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, which of course they don't want to do, but never mind. You would then say to the European Union, we just left under our law, we're no longer members of the European Union, but don't worry, because all of your law stays in place, because it's all been transposed as acts of Parliament or regulations. And indeed, Bill Cash, Conservative MP, wrote a draft bill that said exactly that. And I used it as Appendix 1 in my plan because he'd already done the work. We leave, we then tell them how we are going to repeal and amend legislation. Because last time I got a figure from the European Parliament Library, there were about 175,000 bits of legislation, if you count every jot and tittle of everything that's ever gone through. You can't disentangle yourself from that in 2 years. It's impossible. But what you would do is say, number one priority, tariff-free trade. We offer you tariff-free trade on the same terms you've got it now. Do you want it? If not, we'll go on to WTO terms, which of course most of the world trades on WTO terms. We'd actually probably be a bit better off if we did that and stayed under the European Union treaties. We can do that. Your choice, because you're going to make the choice. The EU will have to decide if it wants to do that. We can't make them, but we give them a week to think about it. Let us know what you want to do, and you can do that. And I think that would work quite well. Citizens' rights, the next big thing that everyone's concerned about. You can have the same rights that you've got now, providing our citizens get the same rights, and we can draw up an agreement for that. They're actually getting the much better end of the deal because there are approximately 3.3 million European citizens in the UK. There are approximately 800,000 UK citizens on the continent. Most of our people are either in gainful employment or they're pensioners living in Spain in the warm weather. We've got an awful lot of people who come here because we have things they don't. We have the National Health Service, we have free education, we have a benefit system. We have all kinds of things that if you live in Eastern Europe, you have to pay for example. There is no health service. There's no public housing in countries. And if you try going to Greece and asking them for a public, somewhere, a council flat, health service and benefits, I don't think you're going to get very far. So it's not surprising that a lot of those people come to our country. So they'll be actually getting the much better end of the deal. After that, you look at lots of other practical things, which a lot of them could be solved very quickly. Like this nonsense of aeroplanes falling out of the sky. That could all be resolved pretty quickly. with agreements on air traffic control and all the rest of it. So that's what you would do if you really wanted to leave. But of course, our government didn't want to leave and still doesn't want to leave. And our Parliament, that's the big problem. Our Parliament doesn't want to leave. Try and widen the discussion here. What's the problem with our politicians? Well, Brexit was far more about the EU. I do agree with some people about that on the other side of the argument. It was about far more than the EU. The EU is bad enough, of course, and the core argument for getting out is that it's not democratic and we want to control our own destiny through our own elected parliament, making our own laws. And of course, I believe that economically we'd be a lot better off outside the European Union. That's another argument. But really, what it did, Brexit didn't create divisions in British society. What it did is shine a light on existing divisions in British society, which we may have not been fully aware of until that light was shone. We have a media and political class that share certain utopian dreams and ideas about the society that they want to live in, which are not shared by millions of people underneath that political and media class. And let's just say a few things about what that looks like. Well, their attachment to the European Union is a kind of philosophical idea that Plato described in the Republic. Democracy doesn't work. So what you do is you have rule by what he called philosopher kings, wise, all-knowing politicians and technocrats who know much better than the ordinary people what's good for them. And that's the way they think about the EU. The Commission, under nice men like Mr. Juncker, Mr. Tusk, with brilliant political minds like Mr. Verhofstadt. These people are so much better at governing your lives than somebody you elect and is answerable to you than you can sack. Oh, that's a dreadful idea. We have to be governed by the European Union. They are attached to being governed by a foreign power because they think that is going to be so far superior to being governed by their own elected representatives. And economic prosperity. They actually believe that having a centralised economy in Brussels is so much better than your own politicians and your own business leaders trying to run your own economy. And they hold to that idea, even in face of all the evidence to the contrary. The European Union is declining as an economic zone in comparison to other parts of the world who are actually increasing their prosperity. And of course, you have the Eurozone, which has caused so much devastation in countries across Europe because it's a politically driven idea, not an economically driven one, whereby you say that 28 different countries, I think there are about 19 members of the European single currency at the moment, but the plan is that everybody should be in it. They all need the same external exchange rate. They all need the same internal interest rates. And what has that produced? Massive economic problems in countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy. And look at the horrendously high youth unemployment. That is a tragedy that these kids, in the years when they need to be on the employment ladder and forging their careers, can't even find jobs. I think it's up to about 50% or something in Greece. It's an absolute tragedy. And it's worse than that. It is a crime because though it didn't have to happen, it's happened because of this artificial construction called the European single currency. But that is something that our elites think is a good idea because it's come from these wise, all-knowing technocrats in Brussels who know so much better than we do. What are their other ideological commitments? Well, they think that mass uncontrolled immigration is a great thing and a desirable thing, and we must have it. They're completely committed to the idea of the multicultural society. Now, let me explain this first of all, because I've written a lot about this when I was immigration spokesman. UKIP and I are not opposed to immigration. I married one 31 years ago. There is nothing wrong with some immigration where you have a selective immigration policy, where people come in that you think will integrate into your society in appropriate numbers. And then people meld together, they got on with each other. There is nothing wrong with people enjoying their cultural differences privately. If I went to a Hindu wedding recently, or not recently, it's a few years ago now, thoroughly enjoyed it, never been to one before, thought it was a great experience. People can enjoy other cultures provided it's done on a voluntary basis and it's something that people do in their private life. What we've seen is state-sponsored multiculturalism, where we have foreign languages, not to help people learn English, but where they exist in parallel in schools, in hospitals and places like that across the country, which means that people don't assimilate, they don't integrate. But they are committed to all of this. They think it's a wonderful idea. And of course we've got political correctness, which we now know, we understand to be a culturally Marxist idea, which is to break down people's national identities, their identities of their own cultures, in order to all assimilate into this great new culture that they think is going to be created. And of course, as Alan so well described, we are supposed to accept insanity as sanity, and if you don't, then you are in danger of being arrested for a hate crime. But of course I don't hate anybody. We have nothing against, I certainly don't, and most of I'm sure 99.9% of the people in UKIP don't have anything against people who are gay or lesbian or bisexual or anything else. I made a good joke in the European Parliament once, which got me in the paper, because on a Monday night, it's a very bad time to actually do emails, because you're very tired after a long journey. Parliament has an opening session, you go in the bar, you have a couple of drinks, you go up and look at your emails, and I saw this email come round and it said, all of the assistants in the Parliament were going to hold an event in Strasbourg where it was gays, bisexuals, lesbians, and they listed all of these things out that they were going to go and have a celebration for in this bar or wherever it was. So I emailed back and I said, I think you've forgotten one very important group here, the trisexuals, try anything sexual. It got me in the paper. Some people wrote back and were angry about it. I said, what's the matter? Haven't you got a sense of humour? But anyway, a lot of these people don't. But we don't have problems with anybody. We've had, I think we had the first 6'7" transsexual lady. Oh, sorry. Yes, she was a lady. Sorry, I've got that bit wrong. I don't want to be prosecuted. As one of our MPs in the first term. Which other party's done that? I don't know. I don't doubt it very much. So we don't have a problem. But the problem is when, as Alan has described, when its ideas are being forced on people, which they have to accept against the evidence of their own eyes and their own normal, sane intelligence. Now, if somebody walks down the street dressed as Napoleon, will you be arrested for a hate crime if you don't address him as Monsieur l'Empereur? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't address somebody in the way that they want to be addressed, because why not? It's polite. Why wouldn't you do that? And I've met them, you've met people who you think, is that a man dressed as a woman? But you say hello, and you refer to as she, because that's a polite thing to do. But we've moved beyond that now. We've moved way beyond that now, where people are going to face the possible, you've seen the thing this week, which I tweeted on, about a lady writer, a journalist on a TV programme, who misgendered some other lady's son, who decided that he should be a girl. And of course now she faces possible prosecution, although I understand that the case has now been dropped. I saw a very funny tweet as a result of that, where somebody said, this morning I got up and my 2-year-old child addressed me as Daddy. I have reported to the police for misgendering me. I mean, you have to make a joke about it, because otherwise you just exist in a completely crazy world. So we have political correctness, which is one of their great passions. And George, and of course we have, as I've said already, we have multiculturalism, which has engendered all types of problems. But I think the last thing, and the least understandable from these people, is their devotion to the Islamization of society. Because the things that literalist and fundamentalist Islam stands for are completely inimical to what the great liberal left-wing elites in the media and in politics actually stand for. They will be the first people to suffer if they had to live in a literalist Islamic society. And yet they embrace it. They can't embrace it quickly enough or hard enough. And anyone who actually says, hang on a minute, I don't think these things are a good idea, is labelled as right-wing or far-right or a Nazi, and a racist, of course. If you have a view about mass immigration and you don't think it's a good idea, you are a racist. Actually, being black doesn't help you, by the way, because we have had candidates gone out for UKIP who have actually been called racists, even though they are obviously from countries like Bengal or Pakistan or wherever. Yes, believe me or not, we have had, and we do have candidates like that, and they get called racist. It's insanity. They've just got a view about the appropriateness of immigration and the numbers. But I think the Islamification thing is one of the most serious threats we face in this country, because again, as Carl was describing now, it isn't a race, it's an ideology. And I've got well, I haven't got into trouble because I don't care. I say what I think and people question me and I defend myself. It's not about people's race, because you can be a follower of Islam, whatever colour you are, whatever race you are. It's about the ideology. And it isn't like other religions. It is militant, and it does teach violence and opposition to other people who want to submit to those beliefs, and that's in their operating manual, the Quran. Other religions are not on a par with Islam. If conflicts exist between them, it's because of the failings of individual people. It's not because that's what their holy books tell them that they should do. So what can we do about it all? Well, most people now find it hard to stand up against this oppression, and I understand why, because I meet them. People's jobs are at threat, their careers are at threat, their businesses can suffer if they are seen to be in favour of, for example, just supporting UKIP, let alone saying that immigration could be controlled, or we don't think that allowing vast numbers of people could come in from Islamic countries who want to propagate their religion in our country is a good idea. They are under threat. And one of the most extreme examples of that is somebody you all have heard of called Tommy Robinson, who I've got into trouble for actually adopting as one of my advisors. I've got lots of advisors on lots of different subjects. He's one of them. He gets the most publicity. Now, if you actually look what happened in his life, it's quite frightening. I mean, I'm going to say this, I don't know whether he minds me saying it or not, but he's told me this story very recently, is that he has people coming to his house, threatening him, threatening his wife, threatening his children. And he goes to the police and they say there is a very real threat against you in the house you're living in. You have to move. You have to get out. And he says, well, I haven't got anywhere else to live. And they say, we can't protect your children. And then the social services ring up and say, if you don't take if you leave the children in the house, we'll take them away. That's like Nazi Germany. That's like Soviet Russia. That's what that man faces. And every time I meet him, he's in a good mood, he's jovial. I wouldn't, I'd be cracking up, I'd be in a terrible state. But he's got such tremendous courage and fortitude in this. I don't know how he does it, but he is. And what's his crime? His crime is standing up and speaking the truth about certain things. And I tell you why they don't want him doing what he's doing. Is because he is going to research, and he is doing that, and that's part of the reason why I'm associated with him. He's going to use his journalistic skills to go around and uncover not the grooming gangs and what they did, but the local authorities and the police who were complicit in allowing this to happen, who didn't do their duty. Why didn't they do their duty? This is why I believe, and he believes, that they are clamping down on him the way that they are. It's not so much about the crimes that have been committed, but where those crimes lead you to other people who should have done something about it and didn't. Right, so what do we do about it? We still live in a democracy, nominally, anyway, even if not in much reality these days. The only weapon that we have is the ballot box. We have to get rid of the political class that we've got and replace them with something else. Now, Alan was very, very generous about what's happened in UKIP over the last 13 months. I took it on, it was about to go down the tube, it was finished. I had MEPs now who've walked off to the new party, I can't remember what it's called. It was run by a lady who had to resign yesterday because she was accused of being racist and far right. I think she'd accused me of that as well before, so it catches us all in the end. They were telling me UKIP was finished, walk away. And one of them said to me, oh, Gerard, you were a founder member. Why don't you take the party over and close it down? You're the best person to do that. I said, you've got to be kidding. I said, do you think I've just spent the last 24 years of my life doing this in order to close the party down? And the reason I took on the interim leadership is not because I wanted to be a leader. I would have much preferred somebody else to do it. But there wasn't anybody. Nobody was prepared to do it. And I said, I can't get up in the morning and look in the mirror and know that I'm getting a good living out of being a UKIP MEP while I let the party disappear. So I stood up and did it, and for the first few months I didn't know whether we could save it or not. And it wasn't me, it was the people that worked with me. I've got Liz sitting back there, who came in and volunteered. In the early days, I had nobody working for me. Liz took her annual leave off a day every Friday for the first few weeks and came in and worked for me in her holiday time on a Friday to clear all the emails and all the other stuff that I have to deal with. And she's been a fantastic support for me. And I've got other people as well, obviously, in the NEC, in the party. And I can't sing highly enough the praises of the 8 or so people who work at Newton Abbot, because without them, there'd be no party. They're the ones that do the daily running. Anyway, I wasn't sure whether we could save the party or not. I asked for the money came in. Probably the worst day I've had so far, when I was sitting in my office and opened a letter, and it was a legal bill for £175,000 that the party had managed to get himself liable for in a libel case. But anyway, we found a way of paying it. I had a chairman, Tony McIntyre, who helped. We had a treasurer then, Seb Fairweather, who was a great help in doing that. And we got over those humps, and the difficult part was to rebuild the party politically. I had help from a lady who really gave me a lot of help in this, and her name is Theresa May. And back at last summer, when she came back with her Chequers agreement, I'd managed to get the finances round a bit. How are we going to get the membership up? And then she gave me this real leg up with that, and the membership started to go up, and it's been going up ever since. It went down to a low point of about 17,000. It's now up to about 28,000, which is much, much better. It's produced an income now which we can actually function on as a party. The big problem is raising money for elections, and I'll come on to that in a minute. The only way we can change things is to get rid of our political class and replace them with something else. How do we do that? You fight elections. UKIP has to become an electoral threat again. That's the difficult part, believe me. Raising money, raising members, that's easy compared to getting votes in elections. But our polling is going up. It went down to 1 or 2% under our previous leader. It's now back up to an average of 7 or 8%, depending which poll you read. It's probably a bit above that. A poll last week for the European elections put us on 17%. Well, that's not bad considering what we've had to recover from. Our big test is we've got a couple of big tests coming along. One is the Newport West by-election in Wales, where Neil Hamilton has kindly stood up to be the candidate. We have to get that percentage up over 7 or 8% to prove that we're an electoral threat. Then we've got the local council elections on the 2nd of May. We have to get the percentage up there, and we have to win some seats. Easier to do than in a council election than in a parliamentary election, but we need to win some seats. And if there is a European election, and it's still quite possible, then we have to come in and win that. We have to be top of the poll, as we were last time in 2014, because that is a proportional representation system. People know they get what they vote for, and that's why they voted UKIP in big numbers last time, because they wanted to leave the European Union. And now we have 17.4 million voters who've been thwarted, and even more, I think, because a lot of people voted to remain because of Project Fear, and I think there's a lot more votes out there to get. People who think like us, and I think now the kind of political world is divided into, somebody once said the world is divided into 2 different lots of people. Those who think there are 2 different lots of people and those who don't. That was a subtle joke, which obviously was too subtle. But I think my view is that the world is now kind of divided into two different lots of people politically. It's the extreme left wing and the politically correct brigade, and the same people. And the same people don't all have to belong to the same political party, but they are people who say, hang on a minute, that isn't so. The evidence of my eyes and my own intelligence tells me there's something different. They are not propagandized. They've not been brainwashed. And you so nicked that quote. I think it was you, Carl, didn't you? Because I was going to quote that. As George Orwell said, in times of universal deceit, to telling the truth is a revolutionary act, and you need to be revolutionaries. Just by standing up in what little way you can, even if that means just putting a cross on a ballot paper when you get the chance, or voicing your opinion if you feel able to do that. Now, I said we need to get rid of the political class. One of our policies, which I really want to push hard now as we go forward, the way out of the impasse that we've got with the Brexit situation is a general election. But there would be no point having a general election under the first past the post system, because all you'd end up with is the same Labour and Tory MPs elected on a minority of the vote. Some of them can get in on 35% of the vote. You know, I can't remember, it was a few years ago, but I think it wasn't the last election, but the one before. The Electoral Reform Society did all the figures, and 65% of votes don't elect anybody. Because I'm sure many of you sit in constituencies where you've got somebody who elected on 40% of the vote, 60% of the vote went for parties that never won anything. We have got to push proportional representation. Because that is the only way things will change. In our group in the European Parliament a few years ago, I sat with a chap called Matteo Salvini. He then went into domestic politics, got elected for the Lega in Italy. He's now the equivalent of the Home Secretary, I think, and he has reduced illegal immigration by 90%. If he lived under a first-past-the-post system, he'd still be sitting in the European Parliament wondering how he can change things. We have got to push for PR. Our political system is rotten to the core, and the only thing that's going to change it is new people in Parliament, and while we're at it, we can abolish the House of Lords and get rid of that lot. And replace it with an elected amending chamber, and a chamber elected on a form of PR. So I have got a tremendously difficult job, which is to make sure that UKIP survives. That's easier than it was, but also to get in votes, because all the good things that you do don't count unless you can win votes from the public. And that's our next big challenge. And when we start becoming an electoral threat again, then we can start saying that these are things that have to change. And the first thing that has to change is the electoral system. So please do whatever you can. We need people in Newport West. We still need candidates in the local elections. They will need some help with a bit of money or delivering leaflets. If the European elections come, well, we're going to need good candidates. We're all going off to rugby for 2 days on Saturday and Sunday in order to have a selection process, because we have to work on the basis that we are going to have European elections and select the candidates and have them ready. Oh, and by the way, if there is a European election, I need another £500,000 to fight it. And I've got a couple of weeks to raise that. So on the way out, please put some money in a bucket and let's make a good start. Thank you.